Hello, everyone.
He was undressing me with his eyes. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. His gaze slid down my body, and for a second, I felt completely exposed, even though I was just wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. Something about that look was wrong, forbidden. But at the same time, it sent a shiver down my spine, part fear, part something I didn't want to admit to myself. This was Jack, my stepfather. We had just moved into his house. My mom seemed happier than ever, convinced she'd finally found the perfect man after years of being alone. And me? I was trying to adjust to this new life, this new house, and this new tension I couldn't explain. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was just me overthinking everything. But as the days passed, I realized something wasn't right. Jack wasn't just my mom's husband, there was something more to him. His eyes lingered a second too long. His presence felt too close, too intentional. And somehow, he always seemed to show up whenever I was alone. Then one day, I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. Mom had always warned me about Jack's private office. "It's his space," she'd said. "Don't go in without permission." But that day, the door was slightly ajar, and curiosity got the better of me. I pushed it open quietly, stepping inside. The room looked ordinary: desk, computer, shelves filled with books. But one drawer was slightly open, as if inviting me to look inside. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. Something about this felt wrong. But I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I slid the drawer open and found a photo album tucked neatly inside. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out and flipped it open. The first picture stopped me cold. It was my mom, but much younger. I had never seen this photo before. I turned the page. More pictures. Women I didn't recognize. Then, I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the next set of photos. It was me. Recent photos, ones I didn't remember anyone taking. How long had he been watching me? I slammed the album shut, shoving it back into the drawer, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing. Why did Jack have these photos? Why did he have pictures of my mom from years ago, before they even met? Nothing made sense. I knew one thing, though: this wasn't just some innocent keepsake. This was something much darker. I hurried out of the office, my hands still trembling. The house felt different now. Every shadow, every creak of the floor seemed amplified, as if Jack was watching, even when he wasn't there. I tried to calm myself down, but the more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I couldn't help but feel his eyes on me again. He smiled at me, that same calm, collected smile he always had. But now, it felt like a mask hiding something much more dangerous underneath. "You okay, Lily?" "You seem a little distracted," Jack said, his voice smooth, as if nothing had happened. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." My voice came out steadier than I expected, but inside, I was a mess. He gave me a knowing look, one that made my skin crawl. "If you ever need to talk, you can always come to me. No secrets, right?" His words hung in the air longer than they should have. I felt trapped, cornered by a game I didn't even know I was playing. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to that album, those photos. What else was he hiding? How long had he been watching me? The worst part? A small voice inside me whispered that this was just the beginning. And I knew things were about to get a whole lot worse. What I found in that drawer was nothing compared to what was coming next. You won't believe what happened after this. Stay tuned, this story is only getting started. The next few days felt like walking through a trap, one I couldn't escape. I tried to avoid being alone with Jack, but somehow, he always found a way to be near me. His presence was suffocating, his gaze more persistent. Every time he entered a room, I felt the tension thicken, like the air itself was pressing down on me. And my mom, she noticed nothing. She was too absorbed in her new life, too happy to see the cracks forming right beneath her. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Jack wasn't doing anything on purpose. Maybe I was just overreacting. But every glance, every accidental touch when he passed by made me doubt my own sanity. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started to feel trapped in my own home, unable to escape the growing anxiety inside me. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Jack broke the silence with a casual question. "You seem a little off, Lily. Something bothering you?" His voice was calm, friendly even, but I knew better. There was always something behind his words, a hidden meaning, a subtle challenge. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine. Just tired." He didn't take his eyes off me. "You sure? You know, you can always talk to me. We don't keep secrets here, right?" I felt a shiver run down my spine as he said that. The way he spoke, it was like he knew something. And then, as if to make his point, he reached across the table and lightly touched my wrist. It was barely a touch, just a brief graze of his fingers, but it felt like it lasted forever. I pulled my hand away as subtly as I could, hoping my mom hadn't noticed. She didn't. She was already on her feet, heading to the kitchen to grab something. I wanted to follow her, to put some distance between me and Jack, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped by the way he was looking at me. "You know," he said softly, leaning in just slightly, "if you ever need someone to listen, I'm always here. No matter what." I couldn't bring myself to respond. My throat felt dry, my pulse racing. Thankfully, my mom returned a moment later, breaking whatever tension had filled the room. Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral again, as if nothing had happened. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the entire evening in my mind. Every word, every glance, every moment made my skin crawl. I didn't know what Jack's game was, but I knew I didn't want to be a part of it. I just wanted things to go back to normal, but deep down, I knew they never would. The next morning, I made up my mind. I had to figure out what was going on. I couldn't live like this, constantly on edge, waiting for the next time Jack would find a reason to be alone with me. I needed answers. When my mom left for work, and Jack was out running errands, I went back to his office. The memory of the photo album still haunted me, but this time, I was determined to find out more. I searched through the drawers, careful not to leave any signs that I'd been there. Most of what I found seemed normal: documents, receipts, old letters. But then, in the back of one drawer, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a small notebook filled with dates and notes. As I flipped through it, I noticed that many of the dates matched significant events in my mom's life: her birthday, the day she got a promotion, even the day we moved in. Jack had been keeping track of everything. But what scared me the most was the last few entries. They were all about me. Lily started school today. Looked nervous. Lily stayed late after class. Waited for her to get home. Lily didn't say much at dinner. Might need to talk to her soon. My hands were trembling as I read each line. This wasn't normal. This was obsession. Jack had been watching me closely, noting every detail of my life. And worse, he didn't even bother hiding it. I quickly put the notebook back where I found it, closed the drawer, and left the office. My heart was pounding, and my mind was racing. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't tell my mom; she wouldn't believe me. She was too blinded by her feelings for Jack to see what was really going on. But I couldn't just stay silent either. I had to do something. Later that day, Jack came home. I avoided him as much as I could, but he still found a way to corner me. "Hey, Lily," he said, his voice too casual. "You've been awfully quiet lately. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just busy with school," I replied quickly, hoping he'd leave it at that. But he didn't. Instead, He stepped closer, invading my personal space. You know, I worry about you. It's important to me that you feel comfortable here. I forced a smile, backing away slightly. Thanks, but I'm fine. His eyes lingered on me for a moment before he finally nodded. Good. I'm glad to hear that. I felt a wave of relief as he walked away, but it didn't last long. I knew he wasn't going to stop. This was only the beginning, and things were only going to get worse. That night, I stayed up late, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about the notebook, about the way Jack watched me, about the way he always seemed to be one step ahead. I didn't know what his endgame was, but I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could spiral out of control. And the worst part? I had a feeling that whatever Jack was planning, it wasn't over yet. If you think things are intense now, trust me, it's only going to get worse. What happened next was something I never saw coming. I barely slept that night. My mind wouldn't stop replaying everything, his gaze, his touch, his words. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't ignore it anymore. He wasn't just being overly friendly. There was something darker beneath his calm exterior, something he didn't want anyone to see. Morning came too soon. I waited anxiously for my mom to leave for work. The moment I heard the front door close behind her, I knew I had to act fast. I needed answers. I needed to know what Jack was hiding. I quietly made my way to his office, glancing over my shoulder as if expecting him to suddenly appear. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, and the familiar scent of wood polish filled the air. Everything looked just as I had left it, too neat, too organized. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the drawer where I had found the photo album. But this time, I wasn't looking for more photos. I was looking for something bigger, something that could explain why he was acting this way. I pulled open the drawer and found a stack of documents beneath the album. Carefully, I sifted through them. There were receipts, letters, and notes, most of which seemed harmless at first glance. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a handwritten note, folded neatly and tucked between two envelopes. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. She must never find out. Not yet. See? Did he mean my mom? And what wasn't she supposed to find out? My hands trembled as I reread the note, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it about the photos? Or was there something else, something even worse, that Jack was hiding? I didn't have time to think it through. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the front door closing. Panic surged through me. Jack was home. Earlier than usual. My heart raced as I quickly shoved the papers back into the drawer and closed it as quietly as I could. I glanced around, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before, then hurried out of the office, trying to stay calm. By the time Jack entered the living room, I was already sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book. My hands were shaking slightly, but I hid them beneath the cover. I could feel his presence before I saw him, like a shadow that loomed too close. "You're awfully quiet today," he said, his voice smooth and casual, as if nothing had happened. He walked over and sat down next to me, closer than I would have liked. "I'm just tired," I replied, forcing my voice to sound steady. I didn't dare look at him. Instead, I kept my eyes fixed on the book, even though I wasn't reading a single word. Jack didn't respond right away. He just sat there, watching me. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me, like he was trying to figure out what I was thinking. Finally, he smiled, a small, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. "Well, make sure you get some rest. Don't want you overworking yourself." His tone was light, almost teasing, but there was something beneath it that made me uneasy. He stood up and walked away, leaving me sitting there, my heart still pounding in my chest. As soon as he was gone, I let out a shaky breath. My mind was spinning with questions. What did that note mean? What was Jack hiding from my mom? And more importantly, what was he planning? The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to keep my distance from Jack, but he always seemed to be nearby, watching me. Every time I caught his eye, he gave me that same smile, as if he knew something I didn't. It was like a game to him, a twisted game where he held all the cards, and I was just a pawn. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the note. She must never find out. What if it wasn't just about my mom? What if he was keeping secrets from both of us? The thought made my stomach turn. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell my mom, not without proof. She wouldn't believe me. Jack had her completely fooled. But I couldn't keep this to myself either. I needed to find out more. The next morning, I decided to act normal. Pretend like everything was fine. If Jack suspected that I knew something, he might try to stop me. I couldn't risk that. So, I forced myself to smile, to engage in small talk, to act like I wasn't constantly on edge. But Jack, he wasn't fooled. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. He knew I was hiding something. And the worst part? He seemed to enjoy it. As the day went on, the tension grew thicker. I felt like I was being watched constantly, even when I was alone. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye made me jump. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I had to find a way to expose Jack before it was too late. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Jack broke the silence with a question that made my heart stop. "So, Lily, have you been in my office lately?" I froze, my fore covering midair. "No." "Why?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice came out a little too high-pitched. Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No reason. Just thought I might have left the door open by accident. You know how I like to keep things private." There was something in the way he said that last word that made my skin crawl. He knew. He had to know. I forced myself to keep eating, but my appetite was gone. All I could think about was getting out of that room, away from him. After dinner, I went straight to my room and locked the door. My hands were shaking again, and my mind was racing. Jack knew I had been in his office. He was playing with me, testing me, waiting for me to slip up. I couldn't let that happen. For the next few days, I did everything I could to stay away from Jack. I avoided being in the same room as him, avoided eye contact, avoided any conversation that wasn't absolutely necessary. But no matter how hard I tried, he always found a way to be near me. It was as if he was waiting for the right moment, like a predator circling its prey. My mom noticed nothing, too wrapped up in her new life, too happy to see the tension that was building between Jack and me. I told myself I could handle it. Just keep my distance. Just stay out of his way until I figured out what to do. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Jack wasn't going to stop. He was getting bolder, more persistent. And I was running out of options. One evening, my mom announced she was heading over to a friend's house and would be gone for a few hours. The moment the door closed behind her, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I was alone. With him. Jack didn't waste any time. "Hey, Lily," he said casually, stepping into the living room. "Why don't we spend some time together? Just the two of us. We never really get to hang out, do we?" I hesitated, my mind racing. Refusing would only make things worse. He'd know I was avoiding him. But agreeing meant putting myself in a situation I wasn't sure I could handle. Swallowing my fear, I forced a smile. "Sure." We sat in the living room, watching a movie. Well, he was watching. I couldn't focus on the screen. All I could think about was the man sitting next to me, the way his presence seemed to fill the room, the way his eyes lingered on me just a little too long. My heart was pounding, my hands clenching the fabric of my jeans to keep them from shaking. "You know," Jack said after a while, leaning in slightly, "you're a lot like your mom. But different." In a good way. His words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak without my voice betraying the fear I felt. Instead, I kept my eyes on the screen, pretending I hadn't heard him. But Jack wasn't the type to be ignored. You've grown up a lot these past few years. I remember when I first met you, you were just a kid. And now, his voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, but the implication hung heavy in the air. I could feel him watching me, waiting for a reaction. My throat was dry, my pulse racing. I wanted to get up, to leave the room, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm, to act like everything was fine. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I guess." Jack smiled, that same unsettling smile he always had. "You don't have to be so nervous, you know." "I don't bite." He leaned back in his seat, but the tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it got worse. Every second felt like an hour, every glance from him felt like a challenge. I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Finally, the movie ended. I stood up quickly, pretending to stretch. "I think I'll head to bed. It's getting late." Jack didn't try to stop me, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away. "Good night, Lily," he said softly, almost too softly. "Sleep well." I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my heart pounding in my chest. Once I was in my room, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My hands were trembling, my mind racing. What had just happened? What was Jack trying to do? I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. This wasn't just in my head. Jack was playing a dangerous game, and I was the one caught in the middle. I needed help. But who could I turn to? My mom wouldn't believe me, she trusted Jack completely. And if I confronted him directly, there was no telling what he might do. Lying in bed that night, I felt more trapped than ever. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the wall made my heart race. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jack was just outside my door, waiting. Watching. And the worst part? I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever Jack was planning, he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. His words froze me in place. Jack was too close, so close that I could feel the heat radiating from him, even though he hadn't touched me. My heart pounded in my chest, my instinct screaming at me to leave before it was too late. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just in my head. I wasn't imagining the danger. It was real, and it was standing right in front of me. I should go to bed, I stammered, forcing myself to sound calm, even though fear had tightened its grip around my throat. Without waiting for his response, I turned and quickly walked toward my room, every muscle in my body tense. I didn't dare look back. Once inside, I locked the door, my fingers trembling as I twisted the lock into place. For a moment, I stood there, back pressed against the door, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened, trying to figure out what Jack's next move would be. But before I could calm myself, I heard it, a soft knock on the door. "Lily," Jack's voice was quiet, too quiet. "Open the door. We need to talk." I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I tried to stay completely silent, hoping he'd think I was already asleep. But he didn't leave. "Come on, Lily." "I know you're awake," he said, his tone unnervingly calm. "If you don't open this door, it won't change anything." I bit my lip to keep from making a sound, tears welling up in my eyes. He wasn't going to go away. He was waiting, just standing there, as if he had all the time in the world. Every second felt like an eternity, the tension growing thicker with each passing moment. And then it hit me, my mom's phone. She had left it on the kitchen counter earlier that evening. If I could just get to it. But how? Jack was right outside my door. He would hear me if I tried to leave. I needed a distraction, something to buy me a few seconds. My eyes scanned the room, landing on a glass of water sitting on my nightstand. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I grabbed the glass and threw it against the far wall. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room. For a split second, there was silence. Then I heard Jack's voice again, this time more urgent. "Lily? Are you okay?" he asked, the calmness in his voice replaced by something sharper. "What was that noise?" I didn't answer. Instead, I moved quickly, unlocking my window and pushing it open. The cool night air hit my face as I climbed out onto the roof, my heart pounding in my chest. The roof wasn't high. If I jumped, I'd land in the backyard. But I couldn't stop now. I had to get to the phone. I landed harder than I expected, pain shooting up my leg, but I didn't have time to think about it. I ran around the side of the house, keeping low, and slipped in through the back door. The house was dark and eerily quiet, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I spotted the phone on the counter, exactly where my mom had left it. Grabbing it with shaking hands, I quickly dialed 911. My voice was barely a whisper as I gave them our address and pleaded for help. "Please hurry," I said, glancing toward the hallway, half expecting Jack to appear at any moment. The operator assured me the help was on the way, but it felt like an eternity before I finally heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Jack was gone by the time the police arrived. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the shattered glass in my room and the lingering sense of fear that hung heavy in the air. That night, the police took our statements. My mom was in shock, struggling to comprehend what had happened. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. Jack, the man she thought she knew, the man she had trusted, had been hiding something far darker all along. We never saw him again after that night. The police searched for him, but he had disappeared, leaving no trail to follow. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And yet, even though he was gone, the fear he left behind never truly went away. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye made my heart race. I kept expecting to see him standing there in the dark, watching me. Waiting. My mom tried to reassure me, telling me that we were safe now, that Jack couldn't hurt us anymore. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not really. And that's how it ended, or at least, that's what I tell myself. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder. What if he's out there, somewhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back? What if this isn't the end, but just the beginning of something even worse? Would you be able to sleep after something like this? Let me know in the comments, because I haven't slept well since that night. This story ends here, but maybe it's not over yet. What do you think?
Bye.